Welcome back to ASBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Elliot Grigg, which means one thing: we're in preview mode. However, you will see on the channel we're not the only two previewing some fights this week. That is, of course, because we're previewing all of the fights on December 23rd in Saudi Arabia. 6 or 7 fights we'll be previewing, all world title action, massive heavyweight dust ups. One of which is what this video is centered around. 3 heavyweight fights on the card. This is one between former world title challenger, and a man that should have been fighting for the world titles if it wasn't for a few needles. We are, of course, talking about Daniel Dubois against Jarrell Miller. It is on the undercard of Joshua Wallen on December 23rd. And before we kind of get into talking about this fight, Elliot, as we like to do, we kind of like to leave that to last, leave our viewers in suspense. We kind of like to talk about, the two combatants first and foremost. So, with that being said, I want to throw this question to you. Daniel Dubois coming back off the defeat to Alexander Usyk, first fight since then. But my question for you is, mate, will Daniel Dubois ever become world heavyweight champion?
That's a annoying question. Well, first of all, thank you for that eloquent breakdown. Joy to be back with you again. It's a tough question because obviously he's young. But to be honest with you, it's a close 50-50 kind of question for me. But if the fence is, I've got a can't sit on the fence, I've got to sit on one side, I'm actually going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is I just think there's several things have to happen, which can still happen. Don't get me wrong, I think like heavyweight belts have to fracture, and then you have to fight someone who wasn't necessarily at the upper echelons of the division. But I look at other guys who are still quite young, even in that division. I think they'll beat him. Now, take for example Otto Warren, who's like the headline of that card. I think Warren's a better fighter than him. I think there's even Anderson, maybe the US guy. I think he could arguably be better than Daniel Dubois in a short time. And I feel like Dubois has got attributes, but we've seen it kind of. I'm not going to say like his heart's been questioned in some ways because if you're nearly jabbed into blindness, fair play. Like I don't carry on. I'd rather have my eyesight. But I think in the Usyk fight as well, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a massive mismatch, but just the way that kind of played out as well, I'm just starting to see like, I think things are kind of holes essentially in the Daniel Dubois kind of attitude, or maybe the people surrounding him. So the answer for me is no, but it's a possibility depending if he gets a favourable ranking and beats someone who's essentially not that ranked, not highly ranked themselves. But do I see him beating any sort of established fighter in the top kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 for a belt? No.
Yeah, you know what, mate? It's one of them where you can really make a case for both sides here. I completely understand where you're coming from, and part of me wants to agree with you. However, I'm kind of looking at it with the hat on that. My Daniel Dubois tinted glasses. I'm like, he's only 26. His 2 defeats, as you said, one was he was jabbed into blindness against a perhaps peak Joe Joyce, and then the second was obviously against arguably. We'll find out on February 17th. Arguably the best heavyweight in the world in Alexander Usyk. So there's only 2 defeats. Obviously both stoppages, but he is only 26, mate. And it's not like he's 26, loads of miles on the clock. He's had 21 fights. He's won 19, and 18 of them have been via, stoppage, and a lot of them have come really early. So he doesn't really have too many miles on the clock for me. And as you hit the nail on the head, mate, you mentioned about the belts becoming fragmented. That's when I see him becoming champion. And perhaps again, we're talking maybe a few years down the line here. When Joshua's no longer about, when Wilder's no longer about, Fury, Usyk, they're all mid to late 30s now. So when none of them are kind of hanging about anymore, yeah, you've got the new breed coming through, like you said, Jared Anderson and fighters of that ilk. But I think Daniel Dubois is in that pack, and against the right opponent, he can definitely win because he can stop anybody. If he lands clean on your whiskers, he's gonna put your lights out. It's just a matter of getting into that position and doing that. So I will say that you know what I'm gonna say he will become world heavyweight champion, but not with any real confidence, and maybe 60-40 in favor of that of he will. But I completely see where you're coming from. He's of course facing Jarrell Miller here on December 23rd, mate, just before Christmas. And without obviously going into it, because we all know the what happened to Jarrell Miller and the whole fallout of the Anthony Joshua fight, and don't really want to go into it specifically. But we kind of are at the same time just thinking, do you really think Jarrell Miller? This is kind of a two-sided question. A, should he be allowed in the boxing ring? And B, kind of following up from that at this level is what I'll say. So if you do think he could perhaps be fine to box, maybe just not on cards like this that will obviously have all of the eyes of the world watching?
You know what, Paul? It's such a tough one to answer because on the one hand, I feel like I feel like it's a no and a yes in the sense that I feel like no, like if you're an athlete and you get caught essentially cheating at the level you're on to any degree, to be perfectly honest with you, like knowingly caught cheating, I think you should maybe you can have a one stripe or like a yellow card policy, maybe depending on it. But I just think there has to be some sort of long term punishment. But the reason, so ideally, in an ideal world, no. But the reason I say yes is because just look at how many people are still fighting that fail drugs tests, and the upper level of the sport. And then there's guys, there's a British heavyweight champion. There's been there's certain bands. There's been a Mexican fighter who's well known, who's at the top end of the sport, who's also failed tests in that way. So there's another sort of light welterweight British fighter that's kind of trying to get back in as well at the moment. So it's just like there's just I feel like a stand needs to be made through within the sport itself, and people need to just be essentially banned if they're caught doing this. But with the way things currently are, I think it'd almost be sort of prejudicial possibly to Jarrell Miller to keep him out when there are other guys seemingly competing that have been caught doping. So in a way, Jarrell Miller is a colourful character. We saw the press conference that we was getting stuck into AJ and that as well. And to be honest with you, that was entertaining. So in a way, it's like you're sort of watching it for that, thinking, yes, all right, you might be roided to the gills, but equally, like it's quite funny what you're coming out with. So yeah, I think to be honest with you, it's a sad way to answer it. But I feel like the ideal answer should be no. But the way combat sports seem to be going across UFC and also boxing, it seems more acceptable that people are just going to turn a bit of a blind eye, and we're going to see sort of Jarrell Miller versus Brock Lesnar or something, some sort of crossover at some point in the near future. I don't know. How about yourself? I know you obviously you're more anti probably than I am, as I'd like to give you the floor really to get properly stuck in. Do you think that Jarrell Miller should be allowed in the boxing ring?
In my opinion, no. But I'm like that for any fighter that's ever been caught and cannot prove their innocence. But then at the same time, I completely get what you've said, mate. That's just my opinion, but it's probably not realistic. I understand the whole. But maybe go as far as saying, as you mentioned, the great analogy there, a yellow card, you've been caught once, we'll give you another chance. But if you do it again, that's red card, you're off, not seeing in a boxing ring again. Um, and in that sense, you're like, okay, Jarrell Miller's been caught once, but it was for an abundance of substances. Um, so then again, this is where the waters are kind of muddied because you're like, at what point is it one strike and then you're out? What constitutes one strike? Is it just one failed test, one failed substance, or if it's just one failed test but 10 positive substances? Do you know what I mean? It's a really difficult question to answer. I kind of wish I didn't mention it now because honestly you could talk about this for ages having a discussion, and it's actually something I would be interested in talking to a few members of ASBR for, and maybe see a video of that in the not too distant future. But in short, mate, I think he is an entertaining character as well. What you've said there, I think it's quite funny. The whole Joshua thing, that was all the press conference was them two, and they're not even fighting each other. So yeah, he is an entertainer, but in my opinion, should he be allowed in the boxing ring? No, but my opinion's worthless because he is going to be in the boxing ring on December 23rd against Daniel Dubois, which leads us on nicely, mate, to the final part of this video. Was, of course, the fight in hand. Dubois Miller, how does it go down? How do you see it playing out?
This is such a brutal question. Joe, I'm actually quite excited for this fight. I see it. I don't see it going to points, put it that way. But I think that what I'm struggling to see is whether Jarrell Miller is probably going to come in at what, like 60 pounds, 70 pounds heavier than
Yeah.
than Daniel Dubois. But they're similar kind of height, and he's obviously got power. And I think if we look at like Daniel Dubois' record, yeah, he's got that victory over Gorman, but Gorman's gone off, hasn't he? Like since then, obviously Joyce the loss. Both have fought Bogdan Dinu, but then you look at like recently Kevin Lorena, not like elite fighters. Similar kind of thing, isn't it? With Jarrell Miller, like he's fought Lucas Brown, who again is roided and old, and then some of the other guys like Adam Meg. He did stop Marius Watch though, which you have to give him credit for, I suppose. Not many people do that. So for me, I see like Dubois. The thing, the complicating factor to me is the speed of Daniel Dubois. Like if he can land, I think he's quicker than Jarrell Miller. So if he can land first and stop him in that way, then obviously looking at Daniel Dubois' stoppage. But I've got a sneaky feeling that Jarrell Miller might actually stop him here. I genuinely got a feeling that he might kind of come through a bit of a beating. But if his 400-pound frame can kind of absorb those shots, then maybe he can stop him. So I'm actually kind of thinking that I'm kind of leaning towards Jarrell Miller. But I do think this is actually, to be honest with you, like this either victory for either of these guys. This will be their best victory on their record. That's why I'm struggling to predict it.
Yeah, mate, I completely agree. I was kind of hoping that you were going really one-sided on one fighter or the other, because then I was going to maybe counter argument your point. But mate, I was talking to Danny about this when we were at the Conlan Gill show in Belfast, and mate, I unfortunately think Jarrell Miller is going to win this fight. I'm not saying again, not saying that I don't think Dubois has the minerals really, or I'm not saying that, but I just think that he's shown signs that he is susceptible to perhaps not wanting to be there all like 100% of the time. The arena knocked him down what two or three times, and that was close to getting stopped in the first or second round. Yeah, he bit down in the gum shield, got the knockout himself. But I think that like if the going gets tough, don't really sometimes think Daniel Dubois unfortunately wants to know. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I get egg on my face come Christmas Eve, and I'm indeed wrong, and Dubois wipes the floor with Jarrell Miller, because let's be honest, we all want that to happen. But yeah, mate, I have a suspicion that Jarrell Miller will stop Dubois um, around the middle rounds, to be quite honest with you. So, which is an interesting one. Guys, let us know your thoughts. Who do you think will win? Daniel Dubois, Jarrell Miller on the Joshua Wallen undercard on the huge fight night, December 23rd in Saudi Arabia. Elliot, thanks very much for joining me as always, mate. Enjoyed that, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you guys, and as always, thank you very much for watching.